Ciprian Jauca. I'm 49 years old. I live here in Vancouver with my wife and our 4 children. However, I lived here about half of my life, not quite yet. I was not born here in Vancouver or in Canada for that matter. I was born in Romania, on the other side of the world. I am a medical researcher at the University of British Columbia, and I've been doing that for over 20 years now. I was born in Romania in a time when the country was under communist rule. My parents both came from villages. They grew up in villages and later on moved to the city as the country, after the war, the country became communist and there was a lot of industrialization. So there was this push for people to move from the villages, and that's how my parents met. I had a happy childhood. It's interesting how children, they don't really realize what's going on around them. The conditions could be quite bad, but what they care about is have a lovely family and a good environment. Life was hard back then. There was a lot of shortages, for instance, of basic things. I remember as a child always having to wait in lines for everything, for bread, for meat, for anything. I like to follow the rules, and my mother took me shopping to the store and there was a long line for buying bread, and she told me, just go and stay at the end of the line. And she went to get some other things to buy, and when she came back I was still at the end of the line, and she said, well, how come you're still at the end of the line? I said, well, you told me to be at the end of the line. So every person that came, I told them to go ahead because I wanted to obey, to be at the end of the line. Those days, Romania was maybe very similar to how North Korea is today, a government that was very closed. We were not allowed to talk to foreigners. We were not allowed to have much contact with the outside. As a young child, I became attracted to languages. I was fortunate that I was in an experimental program where they taught us English early on in elementary school, and I really enjoyed it. When I was going into high school, I became in contact with this artificial language called Esperanto. That was not allowed in my country at the time, and on the first day of school, somehow I found this book and I asked him, what is this? And he said, no, I cannot tell you. You know, as a teenager, that is like an invitation for something that is very important. So I asked lots of questions. And in the end, probably just to get rid of me, he said, okay, you can have it for 1 week and you bring it back and that's it. We never talk about it again. And this was like a textbook to teach yourself Esperanto. So I took it home, and at night I went with a flashlight under the blanket. It's a very simple language. So in 1 week I taught myself, and I went back and I started talking to him. And I became friends with this teacher, and he introduced me to other people. In the 1980s, in a magazine that someone had smuggled into the country, I found a picture in this magazine of a model of this amazing building that was being built at the time in India. It's in the form of a flower, of a lotus flower. I remember looking at that, and there was one sentence underneath. It said, the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens behind. I remember looking at that and thinking, wow, this is so profound. So I started asking my friends, what do they know about this? And nobody knew anything. No one had heard anything about it. Somehow I became very much attracted, almost obsessed by this. So I would meet somebody, and the first question I would ask them, do you know Baha'i? They would say, no, what is it? I'd say, I don't know. That's why I'm asking. That went on for maybe 2 years or 3 years. I was not able to really find any reference to it. I was and am to this day an avid reader. I like reading books very much. With that ability, I went and I looked through the library, every book, every encyclopedia I could find, but there was no mention anywhere of Baha'i. It had been completely sanitized. It wasn't until later, when I was a university student by then, that through great coincidence, I managed to actually find it. There were two girls from Western Europe that had traveled to my hometown. On their way there in the train, they met somebody who was from the same town where I lived. And they said, oh, well, we have a cousin who lives there, we're visiting. And in their conversation, they mentioned that they were Baha'is. And one of them also spoke this language, Esperanto. This person they had met randomly in the train, they said, oh, I think I know somebody in that town that has some connection with this language. It wasn't me, it was somebody, it was this lady almost approaching retirement who was working at a puppet theater. It was rather dangerous for Romanian citizens to even casually on the street talk to foreigners. We had a law on the books in those days that if you did, you were supposed to report it to the police immediately. If not, they would say, well, you have illicit relationships with foreigners, and you would be accused of spying right away. So they had a very brief conversation, and the lady said, oh, especially you came to my work. Now everybody has seen us talk. I really cannot talk very much with you. But as they were parting, she said, there is a young student in this town who's always so interested in talking to people. And she passed them my address. So they tried to find somebody who would take a note to my home very discreetly. The whole process took a while. So by the time I received their message, they had already left. When I got this message, and it just said, we have some relationship with Esperanto, and we were here visiting our cousin who lives in such and such a place, and we would like to meet you. And Mrs. So-and-so gave us your name and address. And I immediately sought that lady and said, well, what's the story here? And she said, and I understand that they actually know something about Baha'i that you've always been asking. So I became very excited. I was like, finally, I will find out what this is. The foreign students, they were all housed in a special dormitory, which was separate. Only foreigners could live there, and they had an armed guard at the door. It was mostly for intimidation, not for other reasons. So if as a Romanian I wanted to go there to visit somebody, the guard would stop me and I'd have to produce my ID. And they say, who are you visiting? And then they open this big book. It looked like a big book, and then they write in it who you are and why you're visiting and exactly what time you went in, and then they would write what time you came out, and then they give you the ID back, and you have to write there a little report what you talked about. It was that tightly controlled, everything. I went through all of that. I went and I knocked at the door, and nobody opened the door after all that. And at first I was disappointed, and I said, no, I've come this far. I will not give up. So I sat down on the floor and I said to myself, I will not leave from here until I find out what is going on. And after a few minutes, the door opened. And this young man came out and he looked at me and said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm here to visit somebody. And I had written down the name. It was a Persian name, which I could not pronounce. I had never known any Persian people. And I said, I'm looking for this person. He was a bit scared at first. Said, who are you? Why? How did you find us? And I said, well, you know, a note was sent. And this, and he said, okay. So eventually they invited me in. There was this two young men from Germany. One was born in a Persian family. His roommate was, his father had been Persian, his mother German. They were both Baha'is, and they had come to study medicine in the same university where I was studying. And so we had an initial conversation. They were somewhat reticent to talk to a stranger who just appears out of the blue. I was very excited, so asking lots of questions, and they were trying to be very calm and cool. One of them said, well, yeah, I actually am very interested in this language, Esperanto. This was the 1980s when Esperanto actually was spreading, was very strong, and it was a way to travel to many countries, especially those Eastern Bloc countries where there are many people who spoke this. And he said, I would like to learn some of it. And I said, oh, that's great. I can help you learn. I can teach you this language. It's very easy. But I said, I have one condition. And they both kind of rolled their eyes. They thought I'm going to ask for money or for something. I told you in those days there were lots of shortages. So people would trade all sorts of things, services for a little bit of food, or, you know, they were kind of, okay, what is it? And I said, in exchange, you have to tell me everything about Baha'i. And they both stiffened. They became very worried. They said, how do you even know about this? I said, I know about it. I was told that you know about it, and I really need to know. And so they tried to avoid the subject because they had been told that it's actually quite dangerous to talk about it. But I didn't give up. By the end of our first meeting, they admitted, yeah, it is our religion. We were raised with it. And they said, you probably are not, it's not very interesting for you. I said, no, I have to decide if it is interesting for me or not. I realized that I will not get more than that on that first visit. So I said, fine, let's meet again and continue and become friends. And I realized, oh, they're worried that I am somehow connected to secret police and I'm there to spy on them. So I said, you'll see that I have nothing to do with secret police. I remember very clearly one day I was studying German at the time in university, and I was sitting in a lecture. I hear the professor say, well, you know, the best thing you can do is find lots of German books. It doesn't matter on what topic, on what subject. It's important for you to read anything you can get your hands on. As I told you, the country was somewhat isolated, so you couldn't find much from outside. So and suddenly I had this idea. I couldn't wait for the end of that lecture. I ran to them. I said, I have it. You must have a book about this in German. You are from Germany, so just lend me a book. I can read for myself, and you don't have to put up with all my questions. And they thought, it was like, oh, would that be dangerous? I said, come on, I have been in your apartment. I could have taken a book, except I don't know which one. I said, just point me to it. I will take it myself off the shelf, and you don't have anything to worry about. And so they agreed, and they gave me a book, and I took it home. And it was just like that. First time I received that Esperanto book, I took it home, and I was so excited. And again, when everybody went to sleep, I went under the blanket with a flashlight, and I started reading, and I could not sleep that night. I just read the whole book. Then I understood, oh, that's why I was so attracted. Everything in it was really something I think I had been looking for all my life. At some point, as more and more people became disillusioned with the communist project, socialist communist project, which was beginning to fail very much the fact that people didn't have food to eat and there was no gasoline. So people had cars, but nobody can drive the car because without gasoline, they were useless. So suddenly people started to think, okay, this is not working out. And one of the things that came with that was, I think, a thirst for spirituality, maybe not religion per se. So lots of people were interested in various things such as yoga or meditation or things like that. Most of them were actually not condoned, not encouraged by the government. However, especially young people, they were very much interested in this. And I think that's also what, in a way, attracted me. I was not looking for religion, but I was looking for a better way to explain reality, a better way to explain the universe, a better way to explain society. We used to have very short TV programs. There are shortages of everything, including electricity at times. So we only had maybe 2 hours every night TV program. And it was mostly government propaganda, and every now and then an old movie just to keep people happy. And they would boast how well the economy is doing and everything is so great and we are number one in the world. And I remember turning to my parents and asking, if we are number one in the world and we have to wait 2 hours to buy a loaf of bread, how about the people who are not number one in the world? They must be so poor. And they quickly changed the subject because it was not safe to talk with your children about things, even at home, because of course children, they speak, right? They go to school, they say what the parents said, and there are many cases where people were put in jail or suffered really because of that. And it was a country in which a lot of people were on the payroll of the secret police. So when the regime finally collapsed, they discovered more than 1 million people were actually informers. Sometimes the husband informed on the wife, the children on their parents. It was crazy. So people really didn't trust each other very much. And yet, I think most people, they wanted to know the truth. It wasn't that they didn't care. They just realized that a lot of what they're being told is lies. When I found these Baha'i friends, and I really immediately embraced the Baha'i ideals, the first thing they told me is that you can't really tell people. It's very dangerous, not only for yourself, but for those other people who are quite innocent. Maybe they're just curious, but once you start sharing with them, you put them in a position where they may suffer. So you have to be very careful. That was very hard, and I had to live maybe like that for maybe 1 or 2 years. And after that, the communist regime just imploded. I have one sister, she's 10 years older than me, and we're very close. She lived in another town, not too far away. So when this revolution happened and the communist regime was toppled, which happened very, very quickly, then one of the first things I did, I took a bus and I went to visit her, and I shared with her, said, you know, this is something I've been holding and I could not tell you before. And she immediately also embraced the Baha'i faith. Even though as a child I liked to follow the rules, by the time I was a teenager, I really had realized a lot of the things around were lies. Everything was a big lie. And I could not keep my mouth shut all the time. So I would make comments, and as a high school student, I decided at one point that I will not be part of the Young Communist Association, which everybody automatically had to be part of. I was sitting in class and one teacher said, oh, don't remember, tomorrow you have to bring a quarter, which is the fee for the year. It was a very symbolic, a very, very small amount. And I said, I'm not paying for that. I said, oh, don't be difficult. It's just a quarter. Anyone can pay for you. Just shut up. And I was like, no, I don't want to be part of this organization. What do they do for me? Nothing. I don't even believe in their ideas. And probably the only reason I didn't suffer too much about it is that my father was a member of the Communist Party. In retrospect, I realized probably protected me. If anyone who would not have come from a family like that probably would have suffered much more. I met my wife in my hometown. She was 20 years old when all these events happened in Eastern Europe, and one after another all these communist regimes, they fell. She had also just accepted the faith, the Baha'i faith, as a 15-year-old. We met, and within a few months we were married, and her friend married my friend. And then we lived for about 4 years in Romania, and all those initial years when there was a lot of social upheaval, and it was very fulfilling. We could do a lot, like help society transform from an authoritarian regime where people were told what to think, what to read, what not to read, what to say, what not to say, to an open society where you can do almost anything. But you have to think of it yourself, and you have to think. It was a very exciting time. We had our first child was born in Romania, so my wife could well be the first Canadian to have given birth in a Romanian hospital. But then the economy really collapsed, so we became practically destitute. And she missed her family very much, and then we decided to come to Canada. And we thought maybe we come for a year or two, get on our feet economically, and then maybe we'll go back. So we came here and we never made it back. When we moved to Canada, it was 1994. I was 26 years old, and it was like a fresh start. I looked around and I could not decide what I wanted to do. I was fortunate enough that at the same time, there was a special program that was started here at the university. A few professors, they got together and they obtained some funding from the government to start a program that would try to research all the information about prescription medicines and really seek the truth about that. And they said, oh, we need to hire somebody. Our first employee, we just started this program. The idea that I can search for the truth in my professional life was very attractive. So that's how I started that. In fact, when I went to the interview, I remember with the head of the department, who was a very respectable scientist, a world-renowned scientist, and he said, yeah, I looked through your resume and we think you're the right person. You seem to be somebody who doesn't give up, and you fight for social good, and you believe in noble ideals. But he said, one problem is that you don't really have a strong background in pharmacology and medicine. I just thought for a moment, and I said, well, you see, I speak so many languages. So in fact, I taught myself Esperanto in 1 week under the cover. I learned German in 3 months. I said, just give me 2 or 3 months. I'll treat this as a foreign language and I will speak it as a native. And he laughed and he said, oh, that's the best answer anyone has given us. It doesn't matter your past. When the heart is searching, the answer will come, just like the breeze.